About 5 or 6 months ago, Christopher Ward announced the C1 moon phase. There were the usual Instagram posts, then the flurry of reviews from excited reviewers and watch websites talking about the Aventurine dial, the sheer opulence of the design, and the luminous, oversized moon. In fact, Watchfinder actually challenged us to name one watch at that price that matches the conceptual excellence, attention to detail, and sheer opulence of the C1. Okay, so we found one, and it's actually 1,500 quid less than the Christopher Ward, and it does look familiar, but it was actually announced 3 days before the C1 moon phase. So, what's going on here? Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, please subscribe because I really do need this. This watch was lent to the channel and it's not paid promotion. I won't be getting a free watch, nor have the brand paid for this review or received any copy approval. So fuck off. Now let's get into the specs, the pros, the cons, and whether or not Christopher Ward stole this design. As always, I'm going to get the specs out of the way first. The Lorison, I hope I'm pronouncing that alright, LS04 has a diameter of 39.5mm, a 45.5mm lug to lug, and a height of 11mm. The lug width is 20mm and the calf leather strap tapers down slightly to 18mm and then back up to 23.5mm. It weighs 65 grams and it wears really well on my 6.5 inch wrist and isn't chunky at all thanks to that Miyota 9015 movement. But, like your mum's tits, this has been modified to make it a whole lot more interesting. Lorison have enlisted the services of the Behrens factory to add a 59-tooth gear module to the existing Miyota 9015, and that drives the stunning 29.5-day full moon phase complication. So apart from the big moon phase being powered by the Miyota 9015 and not a Swiss movement, there are some obvious spec differences between this and the Christopher Ward. The slightly more diminutive 39.5mm case diameter, the price, which at about 500 quid on Kickstarter is roughly £1,500 less than the Christopher Ward as I mentioned earlier, and then some of the design cues beyond the moon as it were. So let's take a look. There's no way around it, this is a bold design and one that'll have Christopher Ward's lawyers sharpening their pencils, or whatever lawyers do, but there are some striking differences as well as some striking similarities. Take the hands, a set of skeletonized brushed hands with Swiss Superluminova applied for improved legibility, more in the day than the night. The tip of the blue second hand is also loomed, and the second hand has a kind of royal blue matte finish to it. Without that, the hands could sort of disappear into that starry Aventurine dial, and the use of Aventurine for that dial is one of those striking similarities. This is sort of the low-key star of the show, pun intended. The moon is photorealistic and is pretty mesmerising, but the way the Aventurine catches the light when combined with the moon, creating the illusion that you are actually looking at some sort of miniature night sky contained within the watch on your wrist, is something else. It reminds me of, and this is quite specific, the sky from Elder Scrolls Oblivion. I'll throw up a screen grab if I can, but the ethereal, dreamlike sky isn't celestially accurate or anything, or maybe it is in that world, but it's a kind of fantastical version of the night sky. Shout out to my fellow Oblivion heads. Another notable difference between this and the Ward is the chapter ring, which has a textured pattern. Also, unlike the C1, there are markers within that chapter ring, with batons at every hour and double batons at 12, 3 and 9. At 6 o'clock we have the fairly minimal Lorison branding, where on the Ward it says Swiss made, so that is a kind of similarity. But we're on differences, and Lorison, having reached their Kickstarter funding goals, have got multiple colourways for this that you can opt for rather than this navy blue. That includes rose gold and all black, which does mean black Aventurine, which I've never seen before. But the whole big moon phase three-hander watch, yeah, I have seen that before. And it wasn't a Christopher Ward. I'd say this Lorison shares quite a lot of DNA with the Arnold & Son Perpetual Moon, just as the C1 moon phase itself might. There's the big moon phase cutout, the diminutive indices, and even a dial pattern that bears a resemblance to that on the LS04's chapter ring. There's also the Schaumburg Moon Galaxy, that has a similarly sparkling dial finish, skeletonized hands, and a photorealistic moon to boot. Were these all stolen by Lorison then? No. My point isn't that Christopher Ward stole the design of the C1 moon phase from all of these brands, nor that Lorison did. My point is that coincidences like this are inevitable. What's even stranger about this case though is that the Lorison brand owner actually shared design renders online before the Christopher Ward C1 moon phase was even announced. So yeah, while those other watches might have served as design inspiration, the C1 couldn't have. We're going to get a little bit academical now. In their 1988 paper, Methods for Studying Coincidences, mathematicians Percy Diaconis and Frederick Mostella explain coincidences as a surprising concurrence of events perceived as meaningfully related with no apparent causal connection. This is arguably a perfect example of that. It is surprising that these two watches look so similar at face value, especially given the time frame in which both were announced. Naturally, as soon as Lorison announced the LSO4, people were quick to accuse them of copying Christopher Ward. So I guess people on the internet get wound up. Who knew? There are seemingly design cues of the C1 in the LSO4 and vice versa, but that shouldn't surprise us given how moon phase complications on existing watches have been integrated in the recent past on those examples that I cited. As those two nerd mathematicians also note, clearly memory failure, selective attention, and the heuristic shortcuts we take in dealing with perceptions can sometimes deceive us into being surprised. I'm sure we've all had similar experiences when people say to us, why do you have the same watch when it's just a dive watch with a 120 click bezel and they look kind of similar? But I, probably like yourself, will then explain to that person how the watches differ in insanely tedious detail, which should probably be the title for this video, just insanely tedious detail. But it was useful because now we have the context, and in that context, is this watch any good? If you haven't already noticed, for 500 quid, the finishing is surprisingly good. The transition between the brushed lugs and the sides of the case, and the chamfered edges and the thin bezel are neat, while the domed sapphire crystal gives the edge of the dial just enough distortion when viewed side on. As the security guard at Asda said when complimenting my prank on him that day, wow, that moon is stunning. It's actually made of mother of pearl with a 3D printed moon texture laid over it. I'm gonna qualify that. I'm talking about the moon on this watch, not my anus. The complication also has this polished frame, which is another difference you might have spotted that the C1 doesn't have. The calf leather strap is very comfortable, even straight out of the box, and there's no breaking in time. They're going to be launching this with an optional bracelet add-on too, but this is one of the few styles of watch that I think might look better on a strap. Operating the crown is easy, and setting the moon phase is straightforward because you just set the crown to the second position and voila, waxing gibbous, baby. The exhibition caseback shows off the Miyota 9015, if you can show one of those off. It's unremarkably finished, but it's nice that Lorison have included a signed rotor. In the past couple of days, Lorison have announced that you now can option a Sellita SW200 movement. That's an extra $200 on top, so probably another 170 quid. It's roughly going to take the price of the watch to about £670 if you option on that Sellita. The universally appealing diameter, lug to lug, and somewhat lightweight on this strap make it extremely wearable too. But so far this video has basically been an extremely dull courtroom drama, followed by me waxing gibbical about this watch. So what doesn't it do so well, and what should Lorison or any other brand aspiring to make a watch like this actually not include? So I've got two main things to talk about here. The first is the lume. It lasts about as long as people's interest in my videos, and that is to say, not long at all. And while the moon has a somewhat bright blue glow, the hands have this kind of Arrakis blue that, even with the help of a UV torch, doesn't shine anywhere near as brightly or long enough to justify its inclusion. The second issue isn't really an issue if you aren't going to get all up in its grill like I have, but you can see the finishing is a little rough on the tip of that second hand, and I'm also not a fan of a capped pinion on a dress watch, as I think it makes it look a bit more utilitarian. But yeah, these are rather small details though, and there's still one to go. Final score. Classy, attractive, and so dynamic that it's impossible not to be endlessly mesmerised. Yes, this watch truly does have everything that this video doesn't. Get this at the early bird price of 500 quid, and it's a bargain that has more than a passing resemblance to another show-stopping moon phase, but is, nonetheless, very much its own show-stopping moon phase. 9 out of 10. There's a link in the description to the Kickstarter campaign for this watch, so check that out if you're interested, and drop me a comment and let me know which one you'd rather have, the C1 or the Lorison. Please subscribe for more painfully honest reviews and give the video a like even if you didn't like it. Thanks to Lorison for letting me spend some time with this watch, and most importantly, thank you for watching. Click on one of these 2 videos if you want to see more stuff from a guy who's extremely lonely in his bedroom making videos. I'll see you next time.